On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Meg Sahni. She is the Senior Director of Talent at Radical Ventures. We're going to be talking about hiring in early stage AI companies. There's a lot of competitiveness in this landscape. There's a lot of different moving parts. The growth factor alone is something to consider when it comes to hiring, securing talent. And a lot of other companies outside of startups are looking for very similar people. So, Meg, thanks for joining on the show to talk to us about this.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Amir. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right. Radical Ventures. What do you guys do over there?
So Radical Ventures is a venture capital fund. We invest in anything from early stage to growth stage companies that are either building foundation models from scratch or applying AI to solve a problem in a massive industry.
Well, I mean, that's got to be a really exciting place to be the last 18 to 24 months. This episode, we're going to be talking about some of the challenges, I guess, some of the ways in which hiring for these early stage AI companies look different. And maybe we can start off with that, because obviously a lot of people probably hear this and go, well, startup's a startup. But tell us a little bit when it comes to early stage software startup companies and early stage AI companies, what is the difference?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Amir. And honestly, it's kind of twofold. So we look at essentially early stage AI startups in two different categories. The first bucket are companies that are really truly AI first, meaning they are actually building and training and serving their own foundation models from scratch. Then you have the other bucket, which are companies that are actually building some sort of product that's leveraging existing foundation models, whether it be an open source model from OpenAI or Llama from Meta, and looking to build a product that will essentially transform some sort of industry vertical. So it could be anywhere in the healthcare space, it could be in fintech, it could be in go-to-market, recruiting. So those are kind of the two buckets. And we typically see these teams look quite different, but have some similarities to them. So we can go with the kind of AI first bucket. And really where we see these founding teams have the strengths is the research side. So we typically see founders that have some sort of they're essentially the specialist or the rock star researcher in their space. So they have built IP, they have the publication record, they've been working in some top tier AI company like a DeepMind or at Fair within Meta, and they've really built upon this fundamental research. And so they're kind of the specialist in that space. And then within that kind of AI first bucket, on top of the research talent, you also really need to focus on the talent that can actually build the infrastructure to train, inference, and serve these models at scale, which is, in my opinion, like one of the hardest types of profiles to recruit for. So when we're building out these AI first teams at the founding level, we're not only looking for these rock star researchers that are at the cutting edge of what's going on in kind of the deep learning space, but we're also recruiting talent that can actually build large scale training infrastructure, that understand how to work with multimodal data. I think data infrastructure is really important. Obviously, when you're training foundation models, it's data and compute. Those are the two biggest things that you're dealing with, or the two biggest challenges. And then on top of that, you also need someone that understands how to manage your compute and manage your workloads and essentially optimize that so that you're not spending millions and millions of dollars on GPUs or TPUs or whatever you're using with your cloud provider. So when we are building these AI first teams, we are, one, recruiting research talent, but then we're recruiting what we're calling machine learning engineering talent. And this talent specializes in different areas of the stack. And again, that's the data side, that's the training infrastructure side, and then that's also the serving, which is around compute. The other team the other bucket that I was just discussing or mentioned earlier is that applied AI bucket. And this early team is very interesting because you need, I would say, a combination of skill sets. You need founders or a founding team that are extremely product driven. You need people that understand how to build a go-to-market motion, or at least how to recruit people that understand the go-to-market piece. So what we see these early teams building or recruiting for, are essentially 10x engineers that are full stack. They understand how to build product. They've built product at several iterations, whether it be in the B2B or B2C space or the B2B2C space. And they really know how to build this product at scale. And so we see these teams just essentially hiring generalist SWEs, on top of that hiring people that have the go-to-market specialty, and then also a bit of product. So we see these teams bringing on a PM or a product manager much earlier on to essentially then continue to iterate. So that could be in the form of a product designer or, again, a product manager. So these are the two buckets, and I can go on and on about what the details of these teams, but I can stop there and see if you have any further questions on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I really appreciate breaking down the types of companies as well, because I think a lot of times, we hear a lot about Gen AI, startups, and I think a lot of people might not be aware that not everyone is deep in the research side. So I think that was a great breakdown. I guess when you're looking at the landscape, and it could be, I think there's competing resources for a couple of the options you mentioned. Obviously, a bit larger companies are as well competing for the same talent because it is an emerging space. Talk to us a little bit of that competitiveness for this particular area, because I think a lot of people, especially in other boom times, maybe it was crypto and blockchain a couple of years ago, it wasn't as broadly adopted. There wasn't this kind of spike in demand, and before that, we see other things. But with this, it seems like we have the major players with the foundational models who are looking for those same resources, and then also companies that are trying to become AI first product companies that are also looking for the next group of people you mentioned.
Yeah, all great questions. And I would say this has got to, this quarter in particular, end of Q3 and Q4 of this year, has probably got to be the hardest recruiting cycle I've ever had to deal with. And I've been recruiting AI talent for almost 8 years. And it's just insane, because we're seeing this skyrocket of big tech companies investing in their AI talent and building up these really specialized AI teams. Then we're also seeing a ton of capital flood into the startup world, both at the early stages and growth stages. So it's really, really competitive to, one, headhunt talent, and then two, close them to get them interested in joining your company. So I think there's a few things that we're seeing our companies do really well, and where we're seeing candidates get closed and actually joining startups. And that's really ensuring that you have a very concise narrative when it comes to your North Star. So the founders that do the best with recruiting, or the companies that have the best kind of offer acceptance rate, are really the founders that can sell what their company is doing, talk about it in a way that's mission driven, and get the candidate excited. I think when you have a really concise narrative, that's the most important thing, because that's really what the candidate is joining for. You're never going to be able to match compensation to a big tech firm. It's really, what is the mission and what is the narrative, and does it make sense? I think the other things that early stage companies can do, and I know we'll touch on this a little bit on compensation, but is really discuss what is their compensation philosophy early on. We are seeing startups be a lot more competitive with comp. They are more well-funded now. So we are seeing startups, even at the earliest stage, offer much larger compensation packages. And I think that's what a lot of startups have to do now. I think that they have to be more competitive. I think they have to up the comp, and I think they need to come in with strong offers. So that's another thing that I think startups can do, is just continue to work through benchmarks, continue to up the comp for certain types of talent, and be really good at that. And then I think the third thing that startups can do that can create, I would say, just a better acceptance rate for this type of talent, is to continue to build upon their employer brand. I think it's super critical to, when you're looking at companies, to really dig into what their employer brand looks like. And if a company does a good job of creating a very concise interview process. They are polished. They know what, again, their narrative is, what their North Star is. They don't play games with candidates. They move them through the process. They have really interesting, robust technical challenges that actually align with the work of the company and not just a technical assessment for them to do for fun. I think these are all things that the candidate will assess and that they want to see in the employer brand. On top of that, a lot of AI startups are also participating in conferences and building their employer brand through technical blog posts and better career pages and being part of the NeurIPS or ICLR, ICML, and going to these conferences and building credibility with the ecosystem. I think that's super critical, and that's what candidates look for as well. So that was a bit long-winded, but I would say there's so many aspects to actually closing candidates. These are just a few that our AI startups are working through right now.
You touched on employer brand. When you look at employer brand and it comes to early stage AI startups, what do they differentiate on? Because it seems like, a lot of projects sound kind of similar at a very high level if you kind of just hear the job. So obviously, especially the AI talents looking for specific things. Can you touch on maybe what people are looking for when it comes to employer brand?
Yeah, I think when it comes to, let's go back to that first bucket of company, which is that AI first company, and you're trying to build a really strong employer brand of the fact that you are at the cutting edge of a specific type of deep learning research, and then you're leveraging that to create some sort of product that will transform the world, let's say. So these foundation model companies. I really do think candidates look for, are these companies participating in top conferences? Do they have a lighthouse employee, let's say a really strong researcher that's essentially the figurehead of the company or coming in to run their deep learning team that is part of these conferences, that's participating, that's running webinars, that's actually publishing? Or if they don't publish because, again, startups are trying to build a product and not publish research papers, are they participating and gaining credibility in these circles, even if they're not publishing on an annual basis? So I would say in terms of employer brand for the foundation model company type AI startups, that's really what candidates look for. They definitely want to see how the ecosystem is working with these employees or candidates, excuse me. The other thing that a lot of our companies do besides the AI conferences are hackathons, which I think is super interesting. So a lot of our AI startups do hackathons quarterly or monthly, and this really invites maybe not, active candidates on the market, but candidates who are excited by the company and maybe just want to get a feel for what the company is doing, and it invites them to these hackathons. So it's been a great recruiting tool for our companies, for AI talent, and we've seen a lot of success from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, I think the more candidates I talk to in some of these spaces, the more you really understand that there's a passion for understanding the vertical, understanding the problem that they're contributing to solving. And I think that's a very, obviously I know a lot of people are interested in the product, but I think this, because you go so deep into solving a particular problem, it's a big thing. When it comes to compensation, and you're looking at AI companies and startups, and obviously the big companies are also out there. I mean, you start seeing some interesting comparisons that candidates have to make between, I got a startup with this package and equity, and then I've got a public company RSUs and a completely different package. How do you see that? How do you see that play out? What are candidates looking for that opt to go for the startup potentially?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I would say we can't compete from a cash perspective with these big tech companies. There's no way. I mean, their stocks are usually doing very well. It's just really difficult. So you really have to navigate the candidate motivation side of things. So is the candidate motivated by compensation and stability, or are they okay taking a bit of a hit to do something that's 0 to 1, to be a 10x engineer, or to be at the cutting edge of something, even though it might be a little risky? So I think it's important to understand the candidate's compensation expectations, or to get a sense, but I think it's even more important to understand candidate motivations before you get someone towards the end of the process. And so in terms of our startups, how they're navigating that is, honestly, candidates are way more educated about compensation than they ever were. There's so many open source tools out there. So it is difficult to have some of those conversations, but I feel like our companies and other AI startups are just doing a much better job of assessing motivations early on in the process. Having also just constant conversations about benchmarks and what's happening in the market, and then kind of marrying that to have a better offer acceptance rate. So that's kind of what we're seeing there with comp and how they're navigating that. But I can go into more detail if you have further questions.
Yeah, I guess the question there, and it is interesting because when you see candidates look at these particular type of companies, they're trying to evaluate the problem they're solving and the potential value that they're creating, and it's a little bit different because the model for even revenue generation isn't fully understood within a lot of Gen AI companies. Like, it's not going to be per license potentially. It's going to be a different revenue. How are you seeing people kind of evaluate that? Because a typical software as a service company, you're like, well, I get it. This is the product they're going to sell. This is the market. I see that opportunity. When it comes to that evaluation, how do candidates kind of start evaluating that potential?
That's a very good question. And again, I go back to the two buckets of types of companies, because you're kind of looking at different candidate pools and different candidate motivations. So for those foundation model companies, candidates are assessing the potential success of that company, even if they're pre-revenue, on a few factors. One, it's how interesting is the data that we're working with? Like, how are you getting this data? Is it multimodal? What are you creating with this data? I think candidates are really excited by that piece, because again, that's one of the biggest assets that you can have when it actually comes to building working foundation models. And then two, what does your compute look like? So I have, every time I'm recruiting this type of research or machine learning engineering talent that's working on foundation models, they always ask me, are you working on multi-clusters? What does your actual compute look like? Are you training these models? What does that look like? So they want to know the details of how much compute you are leveraging to run these models. And that's a huge question that they're asking. And I think if they can get those answers, if they can get the right answers to those questions, they usually kind of make that assumption that then the company is doing something truly innovative and building real foundation models. On the applied AI front, candidates are assessing a few things. They're assessing the founders and the founder market fit. So are these founders a specialist in the vertical in which they're trying to apply AI to solve? So let's say it's a AI for recruiting company. Have they actually done recruiting before? So they're really assessing the founder profile. And then they're also just looking at what types of open source models are you leveraging, and are you fine tuning them on the client data? Are you not there yet? So they're looking at a few aspects of certain questions they're asking to try to navigate how far along the actual product is in production, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense. And I actually like you've referenced applied AI. I think I've heard AI first. I actually think applied AI is a way more elegant name for the second bucket, because I think that's really what we're seeing versus AI first type products. And I guess maybe a final question, kind of round things out, because obviously we've talked about the talent, we've talked about the distinct differences between the different types of AI. When it comes to the founding team, obviously they're focused on the best outcome for their company. When it comes to what you've seen best practices are there anything that stand out that the better early stage startups are doing than other ones?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely seeing a few things that have been very successful in companies kind of managing the early team build, and then also building the product, and then staying capital efficient. So I would say companies that overhire before they find product market fit is obviously a real detriment, but a lot of companies might get excited to hire a bunch of people because they've just gotten a ton of capital. But I do think the teams that are the most lean are actually doing the best. And I think on top of that, what I've seen that's been really successful are companies that hire at the right level early on. So what I'm seeing is it's tough with AI talent too, because AI is so nascent and there's a lot of emerging amazing talent out there. But I would say the companies that are hiring their founding engineers or founding researchers at that staff or principal IC level are able to hire a lot less and keep a really lean team, because you're seeing these people who have actually iterated on product in whether it be in a startup or big tech company. They've seen things before. They know how to navigate certain workload challenges or infrastructure challenges or data challenges. So I do think companies that are not overhiring, keeping a lean team, and then also hiring talent that is more experienced earlier on is a really great approach for that piece. A few other things, and I mentioned this earlier, but really ensuring that you have a concise narrative and that you're assessing early on candidate motivation. I think a lot of people get excited about candidates in the process, and it might have a very shiny, that person might have a very strong, shiny profile. But if you're not asking the tough questions and almost doing a little bit of counter selling early on, then I feel like sometimes you hit a road bump later on the process when you're trying to close them. So it's really doing a bit of counter sell, ensuring that they know that working in an early stage startup has a ton of constraints. You're not going to get paid as much, but you're going to build something really interesting, that the candidate knows that.
Awesome. I mean, I think that's some great insights, because I think in this market, I don't see this dying down anytime soon. I think we're going to start, the growth is going to, or I just said that's the starting point. I know we haven't exhausted everything. There's probably plenty of this conversation left to be had, and I'm sure somebody will have listened and wants to maybe pick your brain on this in this space. Is there a good way of connecting with you to kind of follow up on the conversation?
Yeah, definitely. So as a talent lead at a VC, I live and breathe on LinkedIn. So I think the best way to connect with me is connecting at Meg Sahni on LinkedIn and DMing me. That is where I live and breathe. So that'd be the best way.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amir, for having me. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, everyone's seen or heard about, regarding these high flying AI startups. And I think if you haven't had a chance to work with them, obviously you're probably going to listen to this episode and really think it could be exciting. There are a lot of factors that go into hiring, whether it's the foundational side or the applied side, which I think I'm going to start. I'm going to borrow that, Meg. I think there's a lot of dynamics, and it's a little bit different than what you typically see out there for other software companies. So, please share this with somebody else who might find it interesting, who might find value in it. I think it was a great episode, and appreciate Meg's time for coming on. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.